finding like what works well for you and what you seem to enjoy, and maybe sticking there and really getting solid in whether it's front end, back end,
Yeah.
whatever technology, and then kind of spreading your wings a little bit.
Welcome everyone to the Tech Guide podcast, where we give actual advice to those wanting to break into tech or are looking for their next gig. We have Jamie Pittman on the podcast to talk about her story of breaking into tech. So excited for Jamie. Jamie, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I alluded to it a little bit there, but you have broken into tech. You're now a software engineer, but that's not what you initially started your career on. So let's go back early Jamie days. You were a teacher, grant coordinator, project coordinator, professor, other positions. Take us to those stages. I mean, what were some of the roles you were doing? What made you want to come into being a teacher, project coordinator, and all these other roles?
Yeah, interestingly enough, that being a teacher, which was my first role out of college, I didn't even go to college to be a teacher. Yeah. I just kind of fell into my lap and I loved it. But my degrees are in exercise science and then health education. I have a master's in health education, but I started at the public teacher route. I loved it. And then I got the opportunity to work for a nonprofit that helped teachers. And then things just kind of snowballed from there into different career opportunities based on the things that I enjoyed and my strengths.
Yeah.
And really where I first started getting that taste of technology was when I worked for the Division of Public Health, DHHS, and NC State University. And I worked on this program called Eat Smart, Move More. And I was an instructor and I coordinated the program, but we also piloted teaching online synchronous classes. And this is back in 2010.
Yeah.
And nobody was really doing that. So there was a level of technological understanding that needed to happen to make those things work. And so I was doing that. And then we also had a website on WordPress and I volunteered to manage it. And so that's when I first started like, oh, this is really, really interesting. There's so much to learn here.
Yeah.
And that was really my first taste, if you will, of the more technical side of the world. And then from there, I started working in benefits and I was a wellness coordinator.
Yeah.
In a little bit different avenue. That was more kind of the front end UI that I was working with WordPress. But then when I was working in benefits, I was helping to manage our retirement program. And there's a lot of algorithms that go into retirement plans. So if you retire or if you leave a job, there are certain algorithms that are in place to determine, okay, is this person going to get a payout of their account, et cetera, et cetera. And so I started kind of learning those aspects. And around fall 2014, I'm super active. I play a lot of sports. Around fall 2014, I tore my ACL and just destroyed my knee the first time. And as you know, I just had surgery again. But while I was out from sports and just generally being active, I was like, you know what? I want to pursue this. And I joined Girl Develop It, the Houston chapter, because I was living in Houston, Texas. And I started taking HTML and CSS courses and really just getting like high level, learning a lot of different basic things and just more and more so intrigued by everything there was to learn. And yeah, so that really is how it started for me. Is every job really from, I would say, like post teaching on, there was some element of technology, some really connection, I guess, to where I am now and kind of the foundational little steps that got me here.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting that it like really did start from like doing like, oh, like we're working on like this asynchronous recording and like working on like WordPress website. And then ultimately developing into tearing your ACL and getting an interest in coding, which there's a blessing in disguise everywhere.
Exactly.
I'm curious. So was this something, did the ACL injury when you're just kind of basically like have a lot of time to kill, you had this interest in technology, but that's really what spurred you forward to start coding and actually pursuing it as a career?
Yeah, I think that was kind of the kick in the butt, for a lack of a better term, and the blessing in disguise kind of thing. It's like, I have this time. I've been interested. I had some colleagues that I worked with who were in the IT department that I worked with on the algorithms, and they often would encourage me. They're like, you seem to kind of understand this. You should, see what's out there, like see what you can learn. And so I think a combination of all those things, but definitely that injury is really what was kind of like, okay, I think now is a good time.
Yeah. When you say, I'm curious, on a scale of like 1 to 10, when you go into this initial like coding like boot camp, and essentially like what would you say like your coding skills were? Not like back then, like maybe it was like a 10, but like what would you say they are? What did you think they are?
I really didn't know anything, honestly. Yeah, I really didn't. And I can't remember for that particular initial course if there was any pre-work. I don't think there was. I think it was super, super foundational. And I didn't know a single thing other than probably encountering like a 404 somewhere in my lifetime on a web page. And it was like, what does this mean? That I think was, I think I went in completely, I had no background. I would say I was probably between maybe at max a 2.
I love that. That's so fun. I love that you just try to dive into it with without doing it. But I'm curious, so was it just like clicking for you as you were starting to like work on these projects like within that then?
It was. I felt like the HTML, the CSS aspect of things made a lot of sense to me. And I loved, when they showed us about opening the inspect, I was like, like this whole, thing was opened up to me, and I'm like changing colors. And I remember this is now probably 2014, early 2015. People were doing like Facebook resumes. So it was like if your Facebook profile, but resume. And I was like, oh, that like what a neat, I never actually used it, but I would do just kind of tinkering around with it. And that really, really clicked for me. JavaScript did not initially click for me and was probably the most frustrating thing for me right out of the gate. But I stuck with it, obviously.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. And so I'm just like, I think it's like so interesting how like we've had like a ton of software engineers on here. I think it's always just so interesting how it just like all clicks for you guys. Cause I've tried it and it like, to me, like I've got to like if then statements, but then like my brain just like goes like, that's out. So I also think it's so interesting how your guys' like brains work. And someone might not know that right away, but taking a course like this helps them understand like, oh yeah, my brain actually works like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like anything, could anybody be a doctor? Maybe if they studied really hard, sure. But I think certainly certain aspects click for different people more so than others. And I think sometimes you may not know right off the bat, especially if you come in so green that you're like completely overwhelmed and maybe not even knowing where to start for sure. It may not seem so apparent right at the beginning.
Yes, I love that. But you keep progressing through this career, and then you eventually go to UNC at Chapel Hill for a coding boot camp in 2016. Take me up to this time. I know you said that was about 2014 when you did this initial course. This was 2016. So what made you decide like, hey, I want to go to a coding boot camp now?
Yeah, as you said, I remember signing up early 2016. At the time, I was working as an account executive for a wellness company. And I remember getting super frustrated. So I would manage like 8 to 10 accounts. And I remember there would be requests that would come in to make these really minor changes, like a copy change.
Yeah.
And it would be months. And I would get so frustrated. And it's like that. I'm already had kind of that working knowledge. And then the boot camps in this area, in the Raleigh area, started popping up. And I was actually part of the second cohort ever at the UNC Chapel Hill one. And
That's so cool.
I was, I think the thing for me when I saw an ad for it, it was appealing to me for a lot of reasons. At the time, it was affordable. I felt like, okay, I think it was around $10,000, which I know is not necessarily affordable for everyone, but certainly I was like, okay, I can get a loan for this. And in the grand scheme of things, if you think about opportunity costs.
Oh my God.
Right, exactly. If I go down this other path, I have the opportunity to make this back times 10 plus.
Yeah.
So from a monetary standpoint, it made sense. And I could keep my job. So this was a part-time boot camp. It was evenings and Saturdays. I could still keep my full-time job. So to me, I was like, there's really, if I do this and it doesn't work out, sure, I'll be very upset that I made this money. But, I can always go back. If this doesn't work out, I can always go back to this other career path. And now I've got some additional technical skills under my belt, and that's got to help with something.
For sure.
But yeah, it was, to me, I was very nervous about it, but I jumped right in. I was definitely not the top of the class necessarily. Yeah. There were some people in there, and it's very intimidating, especially for me, where I considered myself to be, moderately technical person.
Yeah.
And you're in there with people and you're like, why is this person in here? Like, they could be teaching the class. So I was kind of middle of the pack.
Wow.
And I remember that, the first couple weeks were, or maybe just the first couple classes, I should say, were like HTML, CSS, very basic.
Yeah.
Then we get into JavaScript. And I'm not even kidding you. Our homework was to do a hangman game, which I think is like a very popular activity for like beginner JavaScript. I could not figure it out. I remember asking one of the TAs for help, and I just was so frustrated. I had to like excuse myself because I'm like, I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah.
This isn't for me. I don't get this. And I, like collected myself, came back in, and then really things started to click for me.
What?
Yeah, I'm serious. I was like crying in class.
I know the feeling.
And, it was just one of those things like, I think it's so uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
When you're put in those situations where you have no idea, you have no experience, you don't know what you're doing, it's so uncomfortable. It's not clicking at first.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. But yeah, then from that point forward, things just, I started building momentum, and we started learning about databases, and I loved that and found that so interesting, and my JavaScript skills got better. Yeah. And then we started learning about interacting with APIs, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like, yeah, it was just like this full circle thing. And still to this day, I get so excited to play with APIs and, bring back data and transform it. I just think that's the most fun and cool thing. So yeah, it was not, the easiest of journeys
For
at the
sure.
boot camp, especially at first. But, I stuck with it. I worked really hard. And one thing that I thought was like a really positive sign was I was eat, sleeping, and breathing this.
Interesting.
So we would, get our homework assignments and things that we had to do. And I'd be in my day-to-day job just thinking about, yeah, that project. I think this is what I'm going to do. And, as soon as I would get home, I would, jump right on the computer and get back to work. So I loved it.
For sure.
And I was just really loved it, was enjoying it and having a great time. So I felt like that was a positive experience. I also made a point, and this is something that I would tell anyone who is thinking about doing this as in maybe making a leap into tech, going into a tech boot camp. We had career services, and I was very explicit from the beginning that, if an internship comes through, please let me know. Paid internship.
Yeah.
I'm, definitely want to know about it. I want to interview for it. I want to be, just know that the opportunities are there, because I just wanted to get my foot in the door somewhere and start getting that experience ASAP. So I would definitely encourage folks, if this is a path that they take, trying to get their foot in the door somewhere as soon as possible is the best thing that you can do.
Yeah. And I feel like even like, as you said, like you might be like middle of the pack with people, but like doing that, like approaching like your professors and TAs saying like, hey, like if an opportunity does come up, like, please think of me, that like puts you ahead of the pack almost, because you're planting that seed in their mind and it's showing that like, I'm taking this serious and I actually want to do it. So I feel like that's like a huge thing that you can do to, maybe you're in the middle of the pack, but that's something you can do to really separate yourself from other people.
Right. Right. And even to this day, I mean, I continue to grow my technical skill set and all of that, but I am probably the least technical person I know. But I think what differentiates me from other people is that I've done a lot of other things, and I've worked with a lot of different types of people in a lot of different fields. And so I think it's one of those things like, you don't have to be the most technical person to be successful. There's so many different, varieties and strengths and that sort of thing that companies need and teams need. And yeah, it's super intimidating, right? You want to be the smartest person technically.
For sure. Who doesn't?
I don't know. It's one of those things that I've had to let go of. It's like, I think when I was in the boot camp, I felt lesser than, because when I was in undergraduate and high school, et cetera, I was always, straight A student, et cetera. But this is something that didn't necessarily come as easily and naturally to me.
Yeah.
But I was just a baby starting from scratch. So anyway, I digress on that, but I do think it's like an important thing to mention, like, just because you're not the top person doesn't mean you can't be successful in your class.
Yeah. And that's what I wanted to ask, because like you spoke about it, like it might not be like the most technically advanced people. Like there's definitely people better than me, but like you have these experiences like a teacher and nonprofits and so many other different roles that you've brought to this, which it makes you way more like a diverse individual of experiences. But what would you say are like two things that have like made you like really stand out in your career? If it's not your technical, you have great technical abilities. I don't want to bring that down, but like, sure, what are like two other things like that have like really made you stand out in your career?
Probably the two biggest things. One, I would say my willingness to learn and take on whatever's asked.
Yeah.
I'm not, even if I'm unsure about something, I'm willing to try it, maybe fail.
That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And gosh, I'm sure many people can relate to this. probably the biggest moments of learning are the ones when we fall flat on our faces.
Yep.
Uh, hopefully with not too many real world implications. But yeah, I would say definitely my willingness to try and learn new things. And then I think probably the other big thing are my communication skills
Yeah.
and working with, you know, when my last job before I transitioned to engineering, I empathize so greatly with my clients who
Yeah.
are they're dealing with these little small bugs that cause such commotion in their day to day, and it's so
Yeah.
unnecessary. So when I'm, you know, in each of my roles, that I always try to think about the customer, and I
Yeah.
always try to think about, you know, who's on the other side and communicating as best I can with, albeit product owners,
Yeah.
teammates, that sort of thing, to just make sure everybody's really aligned and things don't get dropped and that sort of thing, which I feel like has really helped me go a long way in my career.
Yeah, and I feel like that can like speak back to like your account management role as well, because if like I know from account management, like you deal with a lot of different personalities and everyone communicates a little bit differently. And so I feel like you brought that like internally to be able to communicate with like your team members on like how to solve this problem or like this problem.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I also to add another layer, I grew up in a restaurant. My family had a restaurant many different times, but my brother and I worked very actively from the time I was 14 until my early 30s. So being in that kind of very direct customer service hospitality role, you also get, you know, a taste of lots of different personalities
Yeah.
thrown on, like you said, that account management where people are really getting frustrated. And it's totally understandable, but I think, yeah, being able to have that empathy and
Yeah.
communicate really, really helps out a lot.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about like diversifying like your skills. Because obviously you come with like so many different skills. Now you're focused on this. Like, what are some of like the like give me like two pros or like two cons to having such a diverse background, if there are any cons. I know there's pros, but
Yeah, I think sometimes for me, and I would say I would anticipate people who are coming into technology and wanting to learn, if you have a level of curiosity, sometimes that can make things a little bit overwhelming for you.
yeah,
It's like, okay, I've got front end development, I've got back end development. Exactly. It's like, where do I focus? And I have so much curiosity about everything that can sometimes, you know, it's like, okay, let's focus on this one thing. Let's get this in a good place. And then let's think about pivoting to some different things.
yeah,
Yeah. But I would say, you know, I think the more diverse a team is and the more experiences people bring to the table, it can only make the team that much better, right? You
for sure.
see things a little bit different. Everybody sees things a little bit differently. You have different job experiences, and especially too when you are in roles where your end user is a customer out in the world. I mean, we've all shopped online. We've
Yeah,
all,
yeah.
you know, so everybody just has their different experiences. So I think, you know, it just enriches a team.
I love that.
And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just makes things much more interesting and makes things just a better product at the end of the day when you have different voices and opinions in the room.
And I feel like I love that, but I feel like a con to that would be like you're also not like super specialized in something. I feel like
Correct.
that's the
Yeah.
overwhelming con. But is there like is there like another con that you can think of that like someone might not be thinking about if they want to diversify their career versus not?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is sometimes, and it's interesting if you think about like job postings,
Yeah,
because usually they want everything in the kitchen sink. And
true.
typically that's not how things work. I mean, I am full stack to a certain degree.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think sometimes probably the biggest con is you maybe are not specialized enough in one area, and
Yeah.
that's usually what ends up happening is even if you are full stack, you usually are kind of shifted in one direction or the other. So to me, I would think finding like what works well for you and what you seem to enjoy and maybe sticking there and really getting solid in whether it's front end, back end,
Yeah.
whatever technology, and then kind of spreading your wings a little bit. And learning at one of my jobs, the front end team started learning Python, for
Neat.
example. But we all had that, we were still front end engineers, but we started learning Python so we could kind of help the back end team for small changes that needed to happen.
I love that.
Um, so that was definitely cool. But yeah, I think it's good to have something that you can like solidly say, I'm advanced, I'm a pro at this
Yeah.
is certainly helpful than maybe like I'm okay at 100 things.
Exactly. And I feel like that's just like something you have to like keep in mind if like you're wanting to be like a generalist versus like a specialist. Like
Sure.
I'm in marketing sales where like generally marketers own like content like SEO, like social media, like all this stuff. And like you're okay at all of it. But some people are like great at social media or great at content. I feel like that's kind of like a similar thread as you're saying
Yeah,
too. It's like, do I want to specialize in one thing or be great or be good at a lot of different things?
exactly. Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also want to talk a little bit more about diversity as well, but this is talking about women in software engineering. So I looked up a global survey or I Googled a survey. Then the stat came back that 92% of software engineers were men and 5% were women. Just curious on your take on this. Like, why do you think it is such like a small margin of like women that are entering this field?
I think back to, I'm 39. And when I think about what was presented to me, even as late as high school, I don't
Yeah.
remember, anything, even in the technology realm, really being an opportunity. So I think there's a lot of exposure that maybe is missing.
I mean,
And I think that's really the biggest thing for me is I want to be that person for teenage girls,
yeah.
young girls now, like, oh, that's something that I can do.
I mean,
And I think it is maybe a lack of representation. And sometimes too, it's interesting in the boot camp, there were actually quite a lot of women. I don't
nice.
remember it. I don't think it was 50-50, but I would go as far as to say 60-40 with my particular cohort. There were a ton of
Awesome.
women. And yeah, it was really exciting. And even my very first, I did an internship, and then my very first real engineering job, we had like a little junior program,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was four of us, three of which were women.
Oh, that's amazing.
And yeah, it was really encouraging. And we were at the time the three of us were the only female engineers in
Wow.
the organization. And I think it's just one of those things that there's definitely a lot at play.
Yeah,
People tend to hire people who are like them.
for sure.
So, if you're a guy, most likely you might relate more to another male.
Yep.
And the inverse could be true as well. But, in a predominantly male industry, I think there's some of that at play. And then I think too, we just sometimes you get into roles. I've been fortunate, this has only happened a handful of times where there's some demeaning speak,
For sure.
and maybe, I'm talked to in a certain way and assume not to know as much because I'm a woman.
Yeah, I feel
And thankfully, that has not happened a lot. to me personally, it has happened, but I know that it happens.
Yeah.
And there's, some of that. But then I think even to, my original point is just representation,
Yeah.
seeing women, knowing, letting like our youth know that this is something that is a potential opportunity for you. You can do this, and it's really cool. And
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of job security. So I think representation is probably the biggest thing. And then you've got, your micro offenses and things like that
For
once
sure.
you get into the field. But, I definitely want to be a role model for women and
I love that.
to get into this field.
Yeah, and it reminds me of lots. I hate to throw a sports reference out here, but of like Caitlin Clark for Iowa basketball. Like she
Yes.
is just blowing it up in women's college basketball, and like that has had such a trickle effect for like young like girls that like want to be like a Caitlin Clark when they're older. You see Caitlin getting Gatorade deals, Nike deals, all of these. So I feel like a lot of it, like you said, is like representation and like seeing someone higher up like achieve something so awesome like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even just, I don't know now because I'm sure things are so different. I think the field in general has grown significantly.
Yeah.
But I think, just on campuses and things like that, just making it more known that this is a career path for anyone.
Yeah.
I think, there's so many different things, but like you said, just I think seeing someone that's like you doing something that maybe you considered gives you, oh, okay, this is an option for me that maybe you didn't think before.
Yes. I love that. And let's wind it down here with our last question here. We can think about something that you haven't done before. We've talked a ton of advice for people that have like wanted to pivot their career, wanted to do something else. I mean, what's your overarching, like if you could give one person advice that's 25, 30 that wants to pivot their career, what would you tell them?
I would say, I feel like this is so cliche for the moment because we've seen this a lot, but it's never too late and you can always go back.
I love that.
If it was that was the thing when I was going through this, I just kept thinking, okay, if this doesn't work out, there is still a world of human resources and benefits waiting for you and on the other side of this. And I think, if it's something that's you're interested in, maybe don't necessarily, gosh, I don't even know how much boot camps and stuff are now. It's not necessarily, here's $20,000 and just jump right in. Not saying don't go in blindly to anything, but if you were dabbling on a free code camp or something like that, and you're like, this is really cool, I think this is something that I would be interested in, and you've like really done your due diligence, then I would say go for it. And it's never too late. You can always go back to repeat those things, but it's true. It's true.
I love that. And like you said, as you said, there's gonna be tough moments in there where you want to break down, but it's just gathering yourself and keep pushing forward because that's might just hit you right afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. It's okay to cry a little bit if you need to. You just got to pick yourself up, and because there are going to be those frustrating moments with anything that's worth doing, right? Where you feel incredibly uncomfortable. You question whether or not you made the right choice.
Yep.
And you'll get through that stuff. Even if you decide not to move on, you're still going to get through it and you're going to be okay.
I love that. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for joining us today. Awesome conversation on just your career. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.